Hi, Charles SirBookSage here, and today I am going to talk about 3 chapters in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring. 3 chapters that are often dismissed by many people, never make it into film adaptations, and some people actually don't like. So these are the 3 chapters that deal with Tom Bombadil. And this video is not about Tom himself per se. I'm going to do a separate character study video on Tom. But this is about my defense for the Tom Bombadil chapters and why I consider them 3 of not only the most important chapters in the Fellowship of the Ring, but 3 of the most important chapters in the Lord of the Rings as a whole. Because Tolkien actually accomplishes a lot of really important and critical things to the story here in these 3 chapters. And now a lot of people complain about them. They don't understand Tom. Like, what's the point? Who's this strange little man prancing around singing nonsense rhymes? Why show me this guy if he never comes into the story again later? And there are some valid criticisms. The biggest one being how the ring seems to have no impact on him. But I'm going to defend these chapters and point out all of the critical things that Tolkien does here and kind of what I view Tom's purpose as. But first, just a quick high-level plot summary. Okay, first chapter here is the Old Forest. Hobbits finally leaving the Shire behind. They decide to cut through the Old Forest. Merry's suggestion, Frodo agrees, because the road curves around, and this should buy them a couple of days. It should cut a couple of days off their travel, and they'll be further down the road than anyone who might be looking for them will expect. So into the Old Forest they go. Now the Old Forest has a really spooky, scary reputation among hobbits in the Shire, and right away they can feel that they're not welcome. The trees are there's anger and resentment there that builds the deeper they go into the forest. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here. They travel. They're trying to go in one direction. The terrain keeps pushing them in another. They eventually find themselves at the Withywill. I believe it's the Withywill River. And there's this giant ancient willow tree there. They are basically pulled into an enchantment that makes them start falling asleep. Merry and Pippin sit down, leaning their backs against the willow tree, fall asleep. Frodo falls asleep by the branches by the water. Sam is the only one who's like, no, there's something wrong here. This is not natural. I'm not going to sleep. He goes to check on the ponies. Loud noises, crack, splash, comes running back to the tree. Pippin's nowhere to be found as a hole snaps shut. Merry's halfway in the tree with just his legs sticking out. Frodo is face down in the water with a branch almost seeming to hold him down. So Sam rescues Frodo. They can't get Merry out. They go running down the road to try to find someone to help rescue Merry and Pippin. And along comes Tom Bombadil. Now here's this strange little man. He's bigger than hobbits, but he's on the short side compared to all the big folk. But he's this sort of round man. He's got this big bushy brown beard. His face is red like an apple. Got this big hat on with a feather, and he's these bright yellow boots. And he's carrying this leaves with these water lilies, and he's just prancing along, singing a tune about how he's got his water lilies. He's taking them home to his wife, and he's just singing the hi ho, the dairy o, I'm Tom Bombadil o, silly stuff like that. And Tolkien writes all these little rhymes out. And as a reader, you might be like, what in the world is going on here? But if you pay attention, right away the hobbits are like, help us, and Bombadil's like, whoa, hold up. And the hobbits freeze in mid-step. They can't move. So right away you're like, okay, this guy's kind of weird, but he's powerful. Anyway, they take him back to the tree. He knows it's Old Man Willow. He gets Old Man Willow to give the hobbits up. Basically puts Old Man Willow to sleep. Takes the hobbits back to his house where they stay for a few days. And then he gives them supplies, says, okay, go that way. Stay away from the Barrow Downs. If you have to cross by a Barrow Downs, cross only on the western side. Don't go near any of the stones, and you'll make it back out to the road, right near Bree. So off they go, and of course, they end up down in this hollow in the dark. There's a stone. They get ensorcelled again. Frodo wakes up. He's inside one of the Barrow Downs. There's this Barrow spirits there. The other 3 hobbits are asleep, enchanted. They're in some white rags. They have a big, long, bare, naked sword laying across their throat, just sitting there, and this sort of hand crawling spirit is coming, reaching for the blade. So Frodo chops it at the wrist, calls out to Bombadil. Bombadil had given them this little song to sing in case they got in trouble. Bombadil immediately shows up, throws open the cairn, rescues the hobbits, drives the Barrow-wight away, brings them outside, brings all the treasure outside, wakes the hobbits up. He gets their ponies. They get dressed properly again, and then he just escorts them to the road himself. And then they part ways, and we never see Bombadil again. There's very specific things that happen. That was just a really quick, high-level summary. There's very specific, important things that happen here. The first one is the Old Forest itself and Old Man Willow. What Tolkien is doing here, it's besides just world building, because a lot of this story, besides it being this great quest to bring the ring initially to Rivendell and then bring the ring to Mount Doom to destroy it, Tolkien is showing us Middle-earth. And he takes his time to show us this place. And every place, little piece is important. And Tolkien, it just matters to Tolkien. The land is really, really critical to him. And Tolkien is really, really good at establishing rules, laying down foreshadowing for future events, and just putting things in your head that you'll need to remember later. And the Old Forest and Old Man Willow, they're kind of foreshadowing Book 2, when Merry and Pippin end up in Fanghorn Forest and find Treebeard in the Ents. So Tolkien is kind of establishing that there are these ancient forests that are far more awake and alive and aware than our own forests here on Earth. And the Old Forest is left the remnants of what was a much larger forest, but is mostly, it's not awake as much as it used to be, as much as Fanghorn still is. So this is kind of a precursor to what we're going to see in the second book. And it's not by chance that Merry and Pippin are the ones who get eaten by Old Man Willow, and then they're the ones who end up meeting Treebeard, and then setting in motion a chain of events that brings down Saruman. What Tolkien is doing here is he's laying the groundwork, putting things in place that make sense for other things that are going to happen later. He's establishing these rules, establishing these things exist, and these are, again, world building, a little bit of history, and foreshadowing. Even the Barrow Downs with the Barrow-wights, Tolkien is establishing, hey, there are spirits in this world in Middle-earth, and they can kill you. That's a thing that exists. It's important. And he's setting up, again, he's laying the groundwork, laying the rules, and setting up foreshadowing for Aragorn later taking the paths of the dead and calling the spirits who broke their oath to Isildur to come finally fulfill their oath. And that path and those spirits end up becoming a critical piece of the battle for Minas Tirith. If Aragorn doesn't take the paths of the dead, he doesn't have that army, which means he doesn't take the Corsairs' ships away from Sauron, which means there's a whole second front of attack coming that Rohan is just going to get crushed in between the orcs and the Corsairs. So Aragorn ends up taking this road that puts in place another critical piece, because if he doesn't go there, Minas Tirith probably falls. And this doesn't cause Aragorn to go there, but it puts in place that, hey, these things exist. So then when we get to the Paths of the Dead, and all of a sudden you're like, where in the hell did dead spirits who can kill people, where did this come from? Your mind understands it, accepts it, it fits, it makes sense, because even if consciously you don't make the connection, subconsciously your brain, oh, Barrow-wights, we saw this, we know these things exist, here's why. This is the important part, even more than the scene we saw in this book, in this chapters here. Same with the Old Forest and Old Man Willow. Old Man Willow isn't awake and can't walk around, but he's very sentient. I wonder if he was an Ent or something back in his earlier days. Who knows? But Tolkien is, again, really, really good. It makes sense when you see the Ents and Fanghorn that, okay, that is a natural progression from what we got here in this Bombadil chapters. And then Bombadil himself, a couple of really important things happen in his house. Frodo has 2 dreams while they're staying there, and both actually turn out to be visions. The first one is he has this dream of there's this big tower and this whole circle, and there's these armies, and there's this old man like up in the top, and this big giant eagle comes and takes the man, and they fly off. And Frodo doesn't realize that that's Gandalf being rescued from his imprisonment atop Orthanc by one of the giant eagles. So we learn this later on in Rivendell, that this is what happened to Gandalf, and Frodo's actually seeing this. So whether Frodo's seeing it play out real time and he's just getting it as some sort of vision because of the power that resides in Bombadil's house, who knows? And then one of the other nights, he has a dream where there's this mist and it rolls back, and there's these like green hills and this light and this beautiful land. And that's a vision of Frodo's ultimate fate, of sailing out of the Grey Havens and being allowed entrance into Valinor. And if you've seen the extended version of Return of the King, one of the scenes with Gandalf and Pippin on the battlements before the siege of Minas Tirith, Pippin's afraid, and he tells Gandalf, he's like, I don't want to die, I'm not ready to die. And then Gandalf looks down and he's like, death isn't the end. It's like there's this beautiful country that you go to. And what Peter Jackson did is he lifted Frodo's dream here, which is also what actually happens in the very end of the book when they're sailing off to the Grey Havens. This is what Frodo sees in that Grey Havens chapter. Peter Jackson takes that and gives that as dialogue to Gandalf to use, because obviously Jackson loves that imagery. And he just didn't need to use it in the movie, it just worked better as dialogue, and then ended up getting cut. And even in the extended version of The Two Towers, Merry and Pippin get eaten by a tree in Fanghorn Forest. That's Jackson's nod to Bombadil's chapters, because Bombadil doesn't work for a movie. Bombadil also teaches the hobbits a lot, tells them a lot of the history of the world. And Tolkien doesn't go into specifics here, but he just lets you know that they speak for a long, long time, where the hobbits don't even realize how much time might be passing. Could have been an afternoon, could have been a day, could have been a couple of days. They sat there and listened. And you start to realize that Bombadil's been around forever, that he's older than the trees around them, the land around them. But anyway, that's not the important part. What's really important is what happens with the ring in Tom's house. And this is the part that I think really puts people off, and what people point to as their biggest objection to these chapters. Their biggest, this doesn't work, this makes no sense, this is a failure on Tolkien's part. And that Tom knows about the ring, and he asks Frodo, he says, basically, give me the ring, Frodo, let me take a look at it. And Frodo, to his own surprise, just gives it to him. So right away we're realizing the ring doesn't really have power around Bombadil. Bombadil's presence dampens, because the ring makes the ring bearer coveted, that ring. The ring bearer would never voluntarily give that ring to anybody. And yet Frodo, even to his own surprise, just freely gives it to him. And Tom looks at it, and the ring grows in size in his palm. And then Tom slips it onto his pinky, and nothing happens. Tom doesn't disappear. So the ring has no power over him. And then he throws the ring in the air. It looks like it vanishes, but then he holds his hand out and gives the ring to Frodo. Frodo takes the ring back, and he's looking at it, and he's wondering, did he switch the ring on me? Is this the real ring? And so he puts it on and disappears. So he's happy. Okay, this is my ring. And then he decides, let me be sneaky for fun, and he tries to sneak off around the room. And Tom looks right at him and says, hey, I can still see you. The ring doesn't hide you from me. And he's like, take the ring off and sit down. And I think that's the scene that upsets the people who don't like these chapters, because they say, well, why would you show us this character who the ring can't have any power over, and then never show him again? That's a Chekhov's gun you present. That's a Chekhov's gun you present in Act 1 that doesn't get fired. And that's like a big plot failure on Tolkien's part. Now, I understand that criticism, and on the surface, it looks like it's accurate criticism. But there is a Chekhov's gun in these chapters, but it's not Tom Bombadil. Tom is a misdirect. He's a mystery and a misdirect. He's this shiny object Tolkien's dangling in front of you, while Tolkien puts in place all these key pieces of information. And I'll get to the Chekhov's gun as I go along. The other components here is, in particular, we have the Barrow Downs itself. Like I mentioned, the Barrow-wights are like foreshadowing the Paths of the Dead that Aragorn takes later. But there's more to it here. I mean, this place here, the Old Forest, the Barrow Downs, these are the burial mounds of the old, basically the kings of Arnor. Because when Elendil and his sons came ashore on Middle-earth after the fall of Numenor, Elendil established his kingdom up here in the north, Arnor, and then the sons established Gondor in the south. The Numenorians, the descendants of the Numenorians here in Arnor, eventually found themselves at war with the Witch King of Angmar and the men of Carn Dûm. And the Witch King and the Carn Dûm armies eventually defeat the descendants of the Numenorians, and this northern kingdom falls. So we have all these burial mounds here from those fallen kings and this fallen kingdom. And there's all sorts of swords and treasures and bones and everything in there. And then eventually these like basically dark spirits descended down out of like the Angband and haunted this place. So not only did they fail, but they're haunted, they're conquered by these spirits. And this is also very specifically laying the groundwork and setting up the backstory for Aragorn, who we're about to meet next after we leave Bombadil behind and we meet Strider in the Prancing Pony in Bree. So Tolkien is giving us, setting up the history and giving us the beginnings of the backstory of a character we haven't even met yet. But that's how important Aragorn is to Tolkien and to the story. Is Tolkien's putting in place things that will make sense later. Because, you know, we don't even know Strider exists yet. We don't really have much in terms of the history of this part of the world yet. We have pieces. Bombadil, when he rescues the hobbits from the Barrow Downs, Merry comes out of the Barrow with these memories of one of the Westernese men still in his brain. Like he's seeing the army of the Carn Dûm and the Witch King of Angband coming and destroying them. So he has this in his head, like as if it's his own memory, at least just initially when he leaves the Barrow. And so Tom kind of tells them, it's like, yes, that this is what happened here. And their descendants, the ones who survived, went basically into like a self-imposed exile. And they live in the shadows, and they protect people from evil that these people don't even know they're being protected. And these men are still around. And the hobbits each kind of have this vision, and they see in their minds these sort of stern men, tall men, and one by one, and then the last man they see has like a sort of jewel or star on his forehead, and which is really Aragorn. So they're kind of Tolkien showing us the Dunedain, the Rangers, and what their current state is. Like they basically went into a self-imposed exile, sort of self-imposed penance for failing the West. And this is really deeply part of who Aragorn is as a person. And Tolkien is already laying the groundwork for, again, we haven't even met the character yet. And Tolkien is giving us this information that eventually later on in the story, as we move through and we learn more about Strider and who he really is and his past and history, these pieces will eventually click into place all on their own, and you might not notice it. But Tolkien is really just giving us stuff that we don't know we need to know, but we'll need later, and will make sense. Other things will just slide into place easier because we have this knowledge we don't even know we have at this point. And he's giving us all of this through Bombadil. And again, the very next main character we're going to meet is Strider in Bree once they leave Bombadil behind. So really this is just so well done, these chapters here. Tolkien really accomplishes some really important stuff. I mean, just laying the groundwork, doing the world building, giving us important history. Not just history for the fun of it, but history very relevant to the next main character we're about to meet. He does all this foreshadowing for Fanghorn and the Ents, foreshadowing the past of the dead and the spirits, foreshadowing Frodo's own fate. And the Chekhov's gun is this blade that Tom takes out of the barrow, and he gives each of the hobbits one of these long knives. Now, these were forged, again, by these descendants of the Numenor, who were at war with the Witch King. These blades were forged specifically to fight the Witch King. There's only a handful of blades in the entirety of Middle-earth that can harm the Witch King. Any other blade Aragorn's sword, the sword that was broken, yeah, I'm sure that could probably just chop the Witch King's head off, because it's got that lineage and that power. If it can cut the rings off of Sauron's finger, I'm sure it can cut the Witch King's head off. But outside of that, if any other weapon that Merry would have been given anywhere by anybody would just snap when he tried to stab the back of the Witch King's knee, the head ring wraith. But not this blade. So fate brings them into the Old Forest, brings them to Old Man Willow, who brings them to Tom. And Tom was only there because it was just about the last day of spring, and he was going down to collect the last water lilies that were still alive. Because he takes them at the end of spring, the last few that are there, brings them back to the house, gives them to his wife, and his wife cares for them and keeps them fresh and alive throughout autumn and throughout the winter until the lilies come back again. They bloom first, and they survive, and they stay till the last. So he would not have been that way again until the spring if he hadn't been on that errand to get those water lilies. So there's all these moments of fate and chance that all kind of line up, that bring the hobbits into the Old Forest, bring them to Old Man Willow, which brings them to Tom, which brings them to the Barrow Downs, which brings Merry to that knife. Without that knife, the Witch King isn't killed by Merry and Éowyn, and which is the turning of the tide of the battle in the War of the Ring. That's the pivotal moment. And then you also have Aragorn taking the paths of the dead and taking the Corsairs away from Sauron. So Tolkien is putting in place things that set up events that happen much later, but he's giving us critical pieces here in these chapters. Even though they're not directly A to B, it's A makes B work when you arrive at B, and B and C makes D work when you arrive at D. They make sense. They fit. It's organic. It's natural. It's not out of place. And Tom, for me, is just so odd and weird. And he reminds me of my uncles. My uncles were all these big, boisterous men who commanded a room whenever they walked in. And Tom he seemed like one of my uncles the first time I read him. I think I was in elementary school still when I read this story for the first time. And Tom, for me, was my realization that there's a lot more to this world that Tolkien's built than what we saw in The Hobbit and what we've seen so far in The Fellowship of the Ring. That there's so much, there's a whole vastness out there we have no idea about. So a few years later, when it was announced that the Silmarillion was to be published, I was like, okay, that's it. We're getting that other world, the rest of this world. We're going to get it. We're going to see it. And I had to have the Silmarillion. And then, of course, I got the hardcover, first edition hardcover, as soon as it came out. I don't know how many copies of the Silmarillion I've owned over the years. I have it on ebook here. I don't have a hard physical copy here. I mean, all my physical copies are in storage in New York. But I'm going to have to buy one and put it on the shelf there because I can't not have a physical Silmarillion in the house. Just wrong. But anyway, Bombadil for me was that a mind-expanding moment to see this character and realize that, oh wait, there's so much more here. There's so much more. Could Tolkien have given us all these pieces that we needed? Could he have given us foreshadowing for Fanghorn and the Ents? Could he have given us foreshadowing for the past of the dead and spirits that can kill? Sure. Could he have given us even the Westernese blade a different way? Yeah, Aragorn could have. I mean, Elrond could have had the blade sitting on a shelf in a storeroom. Hey, go down the row 5, shelf 4, behind the box of whatever. There's that blade. Give me that blade. No, it's by the fact that Merry stumbles upon it, almost dies, and this is kind of his reward for it, that these men who fought and failed, that blade would sit there for ages and then end up in the hand of a hobbit that would pierce the Witch King and do what it was forged to do, and give these men a victory from beyond the grave. Anyway, yeah, you can see how much I love this story as a whole, and even these chapters here. I love it. I just love these Bombadil chapters. And again, the fact that Merry's moment, that payoff, where that blade pierces the back of the Witch King's knee, is a payoff for these chapters. That this chapter sets it up for us just so smoothly. And again, you're just paying attention to this weird little guy running, prancing around, dancing around, singing silly nonsense rhymes. While Tolkien is like, I'm going to put this in place, and here, let me slide this in here. Oh, you're going to need this little piece of information. This exists. This is important later. Don't worry about it. You don't even know this character yet, but here's a little backstory that will make sense and really bring this character more alive for you later. But, I'll just have to introduce the character to you. But here's some story about him first. All of that. And that's it. That's my defense. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think? What did you think of these chapters when you read them? Did you dismiss them as saying this is kind of a completely unnecessary detour? Like, who is this weird man? Why are you showing me this? I mean, again, what's the point of him? If the ring doesn't bother him, how come he doesn't show up and save the day? So I want to hear from you what you think about the things I went over in this video here. The points that to me, what Tolkien accomplishes in these couple of chapters. That he just, again, so seamlessly slides into place. History, world building, foreshadowing, actual real Chekhov's gun. Because, again, I love this story, and this is the start of a Exploring Arda series, I think I might call it, where I'm going to be deep diving into Tolkien's works, not just The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, but the Silmarillion, all of it. I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever, and I have no idea why I haven't been talking about this stuff on this channel, because it was one of the main reasons I created this channel, was to actually really do like real long, nice discussions of Tolkien's works. Eventually, when I can upgrade my camera from my X-T1 with its sensor that's dying on me, to maybe the X-T4, where I'll be able to actually use it to live stream, I hope down the road in the future to do some live streams where have some more like live off-the-cuff discussions about some of these subjects. But anyway, that's my introductory video to, I guess I'm calling it my Exploring Arda series. I don't know. But I want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about Tom Bombadil? What do you think about these chapters? The points I made here, did they make sense? Will they have you go back and look at these chapters in a different light? I'm just curious, because I love these chapters, and I will defend them forever. I happen to love Tom Bombadil as a character too, and I will make a separate sort of character study Tom Bombadil video. But for now, I will look for your comments below, and I will talk to you soon. And I'm going to start planning my next Tolkien video. I have a couple of ideas of what I'm going to talk about next. But anyway, I am Charles of SirBookSage. Happy reading.